I never thought I'd hear the words from you, Mark. After everything I sacrificed for you, you're telling me I not welcome in my own son Sep's house? I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat, but my voice remained steady. You'll never see me again because I just sold the house. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. It was late November, and the cold air in New Orleans had a way of seeping into the bones, making everything feel raw. I stood there on Mark's front porch, barely able to believe what he'd just said. This wasn't some petty disagreement or an argument about trivial things. No, this was something much darker, something I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. I had spent 30 years as a teacher, raising him, guiding him, hoping that one day he would understand the weight of what I had done for him. I worked long hours, saved every penny, and sacrificed parts of myself just to give him a chance at a better life. This house, my pride and joy, was supposed to be the legacy I left behind. It was everything I had worked for, everything I thought we shared. But standing on that porch, I realized that to Mark it was just another thing to take. "You're being ridiculous, Dad," Mark said, his words slicing through the air like knives. "We've got a family of our own now. You can just keep living with us? It's not going to work anymore." His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth I'd always hoped he'd show me. Those words hit harder than I ever expected. It was the final betrayal, the moment I knew I was no longer important to him. I wasn't family anymore, I was just a burden. "Mark, I said given you everything." I tried, my voice shaking with emotion. "This house, my savings, my time. You can just throw me out like this." He didn't flinch. "I'm doing you a favor," he said, his voice laced with something I couldn't place. "You need to move on, old man." Those words hung in the air, bitter and poisonous. I stood there frozen as he closed the door, leaving me standing on the porch, numb. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but all I could do was turn and walk away. As I made my way back to the family home, my mind raced. The house was supposed to be my retirement, my refuge, my final reward for all those years spent educating kids, guiding them through the ups and downs of life. But now it felt like a trap set by my own son. I walked through the front door, feeling the weight of betrayal settle in my bones. The place that once felt like home now felt cold. I walked to my study where my financial papers were neatly stacked. My hands shook as I pulled them out, my eyes scanning the numbers, bank statements, tax returns, receipts. All of them looked fine, too clean. But something gnawed at me, something told me this wasn't right. I opened a folder I'd left untouched for months, the one marked retirement and savings. I hadn't thought to check it in a while. I trusted Mark, trusted that he wouldn't do something like this. But as I stared at the page in front of me, the truth hit me like a freight train. Large withdrawals, transfers I didn't authorize. The dates were scattered across the last few years, and every time it was the same. Mark's name on the account, Mark's signature on the transfers. I blinked, trying to process it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I missed something. But no. The numbers didn't lie. I scrolled through the transactions, my chest tightening with every click. Mark had been draining my account, and I had never seen a dime of it. But it didn't end there. I clicked on an email thread. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. It was from Mark to his wife, and the subject line made my stomach drop. The house deal. I opened it. It was a plan to sell the family home without my consent, to liquidate it and move the money into their own accounts, to cut me out completely. There it was, in black and white, my son's plan to steal everything from me, everything I worked for, without me even knowing it. The house was supposed to be my safe haven. Instead, it was just a piece of property, a bargaining chip for his selfish ambitions. My hands were trembling as I closed the email. The full weight of the betrayal hit me then. This wasn't just a financial crime. This was personal. My own flesh and blood had been plotting against me. I sat there, stunned. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the more I looked at the evidence, the clearer it became. Mark wasn't just stealing my money. He was trying to erase me from his life completely. Before I could stop myself, I picked up the phone and dialed Samantha's number. She was a private investigator I'd worked with in the past, someone I knew I could trust. "Samantha, I need you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's Sep's Mark. Sep's been stealing from me. I need you to help me expose him." She didn't hesitate. "We still get to the bottom of this, Kane. I still start digging right away." I hung up, my mind racing. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming what was mine, what Mark had no right to take. He wasn't going to get away with this. Not now. Not ever. I sat in my study, staring at the papers in front of me. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing for sure. Mark would regret ever thinking I was too weak to fight back. He was going to pay for what he had done to me, and I would make sure of it. I spent the next few days locked in the house, buried in paperwork. The world outside seemed to move at a normal pace, but for me everything had stopped. It was just me and the files now. My mind raced from one discovery to the next. Hidden accounts, forged signatures, tax returns with suspicious numbers, emails detailing Mark's plans. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I used to think Mark was just careless with money. A little impulsive maybe, but that was it. He always wanted things now, cars, vacations, gadgets, but I thought it was just youthful naivety. It wasn't until I sat down with those damn statements that I understood. This wasn't carelessness. This was calculated. This was greed, pure and simple. Mark had been siphoning money from my accounts, transferring it to places I couldn't see, to a life he'd built behind my back, and I had been too blind to notice. I thought I knew him. He was my son. But the more I looked at the papers, the more I realized I had never really known him at all. The anger came in waves. First, a tight, burning rage that clenched my chest and made my hands shake. Then, a cold, numbing realization there was no one I could trust. I couldn't go to family. I couldn't talk to my friends. This was my mess to clean up. And it wasn't just about money. It was about everything Mark had taken from me. The respect, the love, the future I thought we'd share. It was about justice. For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. No one could understand what I was going through. My friends, they didn't know Mark like I did. They didn't know how he could smile to your face and lie to you behind your back. No one had seen the slow erosion of trust over the years. No one knew what it was like to wake up one day and realize your own son had been using you. So I did what I do best. I threw myself into the work. Every evening I pored over documents, trying to piece together the full picture of what Mark had done. But there were gaps. There were pieces I didn't have. And that's when I knew I needed help. I couldn't just sit here like some victim, hoping the truth would reveal itself. I had to act. I called Samantha again, the investigator. "I need more. I need everything," I said, my voice low and determined. "Find out what Mark Sepp's been hiding. Go deeper. I want to know where this money Sepp's been going, who Sepp's been working with. If Sepp's done this to me, Sepp's done it to others." Samantha didn't ask questions. She was used to people like me, people who'd been wronged, who needed someone to dig through the dirt and find the truth. I trusted her to pull at the threads Mark thought were hidden forever. A few days later, she called me. "I've got some new information," she said, her tone grave. "Market's been making investments, big ones, real estate, a company too. And I think I found a trail leading back to a bank in Texas. Looks like Sepp's been funneling money into offshore accounts." My stomach twisted. I hadn't expected this. I knew Mark had always been ambitious, but I never thought he was capable of this level of deception. And now I realized I wasn't just dealing with a son who had lost his way. I was dealing with someone who was willing to destroy me for a quick payout. "Get me everything you can," I said, my voice now tight with anger, "and make sure it sets clean. No mistakes." I could almost hear her nodding on the other end of the line. I said, "Get it done." The next few days felt like a blur. I went through the motions of daily life, paying bills, answering calls, pretending I was still just the same Kane. But underneath it all, the truth was festering. The reality of what Mark had done was starting to sink in. and with it came a slow, grinding isolation. I felt like I was losing my grip on everything I had known, everything I had believed in. I couldn't face Mark. Not yet. The rage I felt was still too raw, too fresh. Every time I thought about him, about what he'd done, the pain felt unbearable. I had spent my life teaching kids the value of honesty, of hard work, of loyalty. And here I was, staring at the ugly truth that my own son was none of those things. He had built a life on lies, on betrayal, and now I had to make him pay for it. But first, I had to gather more. I had to be smart. I had to outmaneuver him. I contacted Ava, an elder law attorney I'd known for years. She'd helped me with some minor legal issues in the past, but this was different. I needed her expertise. I needed to know what my options were, what steps I could take legally to fight back. Kane, sorry you sep, going through this, Ava said, her voice calm but firm. But I so going to help you. We gather all the evidence, and we make sure Mark doesn't get away with this. I felt a flicker of hope. Ava wasn't just a lawyer, she was a strategist, a woman who knew how to fight back when everything seemed stacked against you. Over the next few weeks, I began to shift my focus. Every move, every conversation, every document, everything became part of the plan. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine, it was about sending a message. I wasn't the fool Mark thought I was. I wasn't just an old man, easy to manipulate. I was Cain, and I would make sure he understood that. But the hardest part of all was the waiting. Every day felt like a battle. I was playing the long game now. Every day I spent digging. Every conversation with Samantha or Ava was one more step closer to exposing Mark for the fraud he was. It was hard not to lash out, not to confront him immediately. But I knew better. Revenge needed to be calculated. It needed to be precise. And when the time came, it would be devastating. I couldn't afford to waste time anymore. Every hour I spent mulling over the betrayal, every day I sat in isolation, was a day Mark got further ahead. I knew he was making moves. I could almost feel him circling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. But this time, I was going to be the one who struck first. The rage I'd felt before had cooled into something much colder: strategy. I wasn't just going to expose him, I was going to destroy everything he thought he had under control. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about the house. It was about taking back everything Mark had stolen from me. My dignity, my legacy, my trust. I sat down at my desk, the paperwork scattered around me like a battlefield. Receipts, tax returns, emails, contracts, all of it was starting to paint a clear picture. I had known about some of the withdrawals, but now I had hard evidence of the extent of Mark's manipulation. He'd been siphoning money off for years, setting up hidden accounts, forging signatures, and worst of all, pretending to be the dutiful son while lining his pockets. I picked up the phone and called Ava. She was the legal expert I needed, someone who could help me navigate the labyrinth of law that Mark had been using against me. She answered on the third ring. "Kane, what's the next move?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. "I've got everything we need," I said, the words feeling like a weight off my chest. "I've got receipts, emails, account transfers, the works. I just need you to help me finalize the legal steps." Ava didn't waste time. "Good. The first thing we'll need is proof of the forged documents. If we can show that Mark tampered with the will or any other legal papers, we've got a stronger case. We'll get a forensic accountant involved to trace every suspicious transfer. Once we have that, we can hit him with a lawsuit." I nodded, more determined than ever. I was ready, but I wasn't going to just let Ava handle everything. I had my own part to play. I needed to be in control of this situation. The more I could gather, the more I could use against him when the time came. I spent the next few days collecting everything I could. Each document felt like a weapon in my hands. Each piece of evidence a step closer to Mark's downfall. But there were still gaps. I knew Mark was smart. He wouldn't leave everything out in the open. There had to be more. Something that would blow this whole thing wide open. That's when I called Samantha. She'd already done some work for me, but now I needed her to dig deeper. She was the one who could go where I couldn't, uncovering details that Mark thought were well hidden. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers tapping the edge of the table as I waited for her to call back. Every minute felt like an eternity. Finally, the phone rang. "I've got something," Samantha said, her voice low, like she was delivering news from the battlefield. "I've been looking into some of the companies Mark has been involved with. I found something interesting. He's been funneling money through a business in Texas. A real estate deal. Looks like he's been using the company to hide some of the funds he's stolen from you." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the break I needed. "Where Sep's the paper trail?" I asked, my voice steady but urgent. "I need everything, documents, transaction history, anything that ties him to that business." "I still have it ready in a few days," she said. As she spoke, I felt a small flicker of hope. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I could see the path forward. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. I was going on the offense. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized I needed to prepare for the worst. Mark wasn't going to roll over. He'd been too careful, too calculating. He was going to fight back, and I had to be ready for it. That's when I decided to take control of the house. It wasn't just a building, it was the symbol of everything Mark had tried to take from me. I couldn't let him get away with it. So I did what any man in my position would do. I secured the house. I'd hired a locksmith to install an extra set of deadbolts on all the doors, changed the security code, and started to gather up all the financial records, the deeds to the house, the wills, everything Mark might try to manipulate. It was like fortifying a castle, my castle. I didn't want to leave any stone unturned. If Mark thought he could steal this from me, he had another thing coming. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Ava and Samantha were working in the background, and I was playing the quiet observer, taking each step carefully. I didn't want Mark to suspect anything. The more time I spent preparing, the more I realized I needed to control the narrative. I was going to get ahead of him, and when the time was right, I would strike. There was a part of me that wanted to lash out, to confront Mark, to yell and scream, to demand answers. But I knew that wouldn't help. If I went in with emotion, I'd lose. I had to stay calm, stay strategic. Revenge was a game, and I was going to win it. Every day I watched the news, listened to the whispers around me, but I stayed silent. Mark didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that I was already 10 steps ahead of him. The waiting was the hardest part. But every time I looked at those documents, every time I heard from Samantha or Ava, I knew I was getting closer. Mark wasn't going to get away with this. The reckoning was coming, and when it arrived, it would be swift. The moment I made the decision to freeze Mark's access to our joint accounts, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just a financial move anymore, it was personal. I was done being the passive father, the one who let his son run all over him. Mark had stolen from me, manipulated me, and treated me like I didn't matter. But that ended now. It was late one evening just after dinner when I sat down at my computer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking in time with my pulse. I could hear the hum of the fridge in the background, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. It was so quiet in the house that for a moment it almost felt like a calm before the storm. I pulled up the banking app on my screen. My heart beat a little faster as I clicked through the different accounts, looking at the long list of transactions Mark had made, withdrawals that didn't make sense, transfers to accounts I couldn't trace. I'd gathered enough evidence now to prove Mark had been siphoning money off for years. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about power, control. Mark thought he could run my life without any consequences. I was about to prove him wrong. I took a deep breath, and with a single click, I froze our joint accounts. It wasn't much, but it was enough to take the first step. I watched the screen for a moment, then leaned back in my chair. The weight of it settled in. This was the moment everything changed. Mark wouldn't be able to get his hands on another penny of mine without facing the consequences. The next day, I waited. I knew he would come looking for answers. He was never the kind of person to back off from a challenge, especially when it came to money, but I had to play it cool. I couldn't let him see my hand just yet. As expected, the phone rang at noon. I saw Mark's name flash across the screen, and I answered with a calm that even surprised me. "What the hell is going on, Dad?" Mark Sepp's voice was sharp, accusing. "Why can Septi access the account anymore? What did you do?" I could hear the anger in his voice, but there was something else too, a hint of panic, a crack in his usual confidence. He didn't know what I knew. He didn't know that the walls were closing in. I took action, I said evenly, my voice almost too calm. I've been reviewing our accounts, and I noticed some irregularities. Your access is temporarily frozen until I figure out what Seth's going on. I don't trust you anymore, Mark. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, the silence stretching out between us. He didn't know how to respond. Finally, he spoke again, his voice lower this time. You don't know what you Kent are doing, Dad. This is a mistake. I smiled to myself, knowing that the power had shifted. Mark was the one who was afraid now. He was the one who had something to hide. I think it's too late for mistakes, son, I said. You've been taking money from my account for years. I've got the proof. There was a sharp intake of breath from him. It was the first time I had ever heard him sound vulnerable, like he realized the game had changed. But even then, he tried to play it cool. Whatever you think you have on me, it's not enough. You won get away with this, old man. The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, the silence in the house feeling suffocating. I knew Mark wouldn't just let this go. He would try to fight back, but I was ready for whatever came next. This was just the first blow. The real battle was still ahead of me. Over the next few days, the tension between us escalated. I could feel Mark's presence hanging over me. Even though we didn't speak much, he was plotting, planning his next move, and I had to stay one step ahead. I could sense him getting desperate, and that made me more determined than ever to finish what I started. Meanwhile, I worked with Ava and Samantha to refine our next steps. Samantha had managed to dig deeper into Mark's financial dealings, pulling up records of his secret investments, his hidden accounts, and the companies he had been funneling money through. The more I saw, the more I realized how far Mark had gone. This wasn't just about money. It was a well-executed scheme to strip me of everything I had. Mark Sepp's not stupid, Samantha had said when we reviewed the documents together. He knows you Sepps are onto him. Expect him to fight back and fight dirty. He Sepp try to cover his tracks. I the spell is counting on that. I replied, let him dig his hole deeper. The more he does, the more evidence we shall have. The plan was coming together. I wasn't just going to take back what was mine. I was going to expose Mark for the liar and thief he was. And when I did, he would have nowhere to hide. But that didn't mean I wasn't worried. The closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous Mark became. He was cornered, and cornered animals were always the most dangerous. One night, as I was sitting in my study going through more of the evidence with Ava, I got an unexpected knock at the door. My heart jumped, and I hesitated before opening it. It was Mark. I had expected him to come sooner, but the sight of him standing there looking so out of place sent a chill through me. He wasn't the confident man I had known. There was a nervous energy about him now, something that felt off. Dad, we need to talk, he said, his voice strained. This has gone too far. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there watching him, feeling a small sense of victory. The fact that he had come to me meant one thing. He was scared. He was realizing that he was losing control. We can talk, Mark, I said quietly. But first you need to understand something. This is just the beginning. I never thought it would come to this, standing on the edge of a battle that had taken everything from me. But here I was, and I wasn't about to back down. Mark had no idea what was coming. He thought I was just an old man, caught up in his petty games, too weak to fight back. But the truth was, I was more than ready, and now I had the evidence to bring him down. The forged will was the last piece of the puzzle. It was the smoking gun, the thing that would expose Mark's deception for all to see. I had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the proof that would undo everything he had worked for. I sat at my desk one morning, the sun barely creeping through the curtains. My hands shook as I unfolded the document in front of me. It looked official enough, but that's the thing about forged documents. They always seem too perfect, too clean. There was a mark on the corner of the paper, something I couldn't quite place at first, but as I stared at it, the reality hit me. It wasn't real. It was a copy. The signatures were all wrong. Mark had tried to forge my name just like he'd forged everything else in our lives. The will, this so-called legal document that would have transferred everything to him, was nothing but a piece of paper with no real value. The moment I saw that, I knew I had him. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was war. I picked up the phone and called Ava. She answered after the first ring. "Kane," she said, her voice calm but curious. "I've got the will," I said. "It's sets forged, I sets forged. I'm not sure how he thought he could get away with this, but the signatures are fake. It's sets over." Ava paused. "This changes everything. You've got the proof we need. We can take this to court now. Estelle, get everything in order on my end." I let out a slow breath, the weight of the situation hitting me all at once. For so long, I had felt helpless, lost in this web of lies and betrayal. But now I was in control. As Ava worked behind the scenes preparing for the legal battle ahead, I began to gather my final pieces of evidence. I had bank statements, transaction records, emails, and now the forged will. But there was one last thing I needed, something to make this case airtight. Samantha had been tracking Mark's financial movements for weeks, and now she had found something that could expose him completely. She had uncovered a series of shell companies and fake investments that Mark had used to launder money. I couldn't believe how deep he had gone, how far he had taken his scheme. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was running a full-blown operation. "Kane, I've got everything," Samantha said one night over the phone. "Mark Sepp's been hiding money in offshore accounts, and Sepp's traced the money back to him. There's Sepp's no denying it anymore." I sat back in my chair, my hands clenched into fists. Mark had played me for so long, using me as a pawn in his game, but now he was the one who was going to lose. "We are ready," I said. "Let Sets expose him." The next few days were a blur. Ava and Samantha worked tirelessly to put together the case, pulling together everything we had: proof of the forged will, the money laundering scheme, the hidden accounts. It all started to come together. I could feel the walls closing in on Mark, and it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. I knew he would try to fight back. He wouldn't go down without a fight, but I was ready for it. I had everything in place now, everything I needed to bring him to his knees. And when I did, it wasn't just going to be about the money. It was about showing Mark that he couldn't get away with this, that his lies and manipulation were no longer going to work. But the hardest part of all was the moment I had to face him again. It was inevitable. Mark had to know that I was closing in on him. The tension between us had been building for weeks, and I knew it couldn't last forever. The confrontation was coming. I decided to wait for the perfect moment. I wasn't going to give him any warning. I would present the evidence, lay it all out, and watch as his world came crashing down around him. He was going to lose everything: his money, his reputation, his future. Everything he had worked so hard to steal from me was going to be exposed, and there would be no escaping it. The day of the final confrontation arrived, and my heart raced with anticipation. I was ready for this moment, and I wasn't going to back down. It was time for Mark to face the consequences of his actions. The lies he had told, the money he had stolen, it was all coming to light. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. I had no fear of him, not after everything he had done. I had one, and Mark didn't even know it yet. I stood in the doorway of my study, looking at the file of documents in front of me. The proof was all there, irrefutable, undeniable. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. Mark was going to realize, in the most painful way possible, that he couldn't run from the truth. And when that moment came, when the lies came tumbling down, I would be there watching as everything he had built fell apart. He had underestimated me, but that was his mistake. It was time for him to face the consequences. The days stretched on, and every one of them felt like a countdown. Mark knew something was coming. I could feel it. His once confident, smug demeanor was slowly fading, replaced by thinly veiled desperation. He'd been trying to reach me, leaving messages and sending emails, but I ignored him. The silence was almost as powerful as the evidence I was gathering. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The house felt different now, like the calm before a storm. I had fortified every corner, secured the documents, and stayed vigilant. Each day, I reviewed the evidence one more time, ensuring there were no holes, no gaps. Mark could exploit. I wasn't going to give him a way out. He had taken enough from me, and now it was time for the final blow. I spoke with Ava almost daily. Her legal expertise was invaluable, guiding me through the legal nuances I needed to be aware of. But even with her help, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark would try to outmaneuver me. He wasn't just a son gone wrong. He was a man desperate to hold on to everything he thought he deserved. The stakes were high, and he would fight dirty to keep his position. Samantha was equally important in this battle. I couldn't have done it without her. She had dug deeper into Mark's financial dealings, pulling up every last record of his fraudulent activities. But now we had to be careful. Mark wasn't blind. He knew he was being watched. I spent my evenings alone, sitting in the study and reviewing documents by the dim light of the desk lamp. Every email I had uncovered, every transaction, every record now felt like a ticking clock. Mark was out there somewhere, preparing for something. But I knew he was getting anxious. His moves were becoming more erratic, and I was just waiting for him to make a mistake. There was a knock on the door one morning that threw me off balance. It was the kind of knock that made my heart skip a beat. I had been expecting a confrontation at some point, but not so soon. I stood up, feeling my pulse quicken. Mark was standing on the other side. His face was set, but there was something off about the way he held himself. It wasn't the usual arrogance, it was more guarded. "Dad," he said, his voice low, almost apologetic, but with an edge of something else, something darker. "We need to talk. All this back and forth, it's Sip's not helping. It's Sip's still your son. I didn't Sip to mean for things to go this far. Let Seps just sit down, work this out like we used to." I crossed my arms and looked at him. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. Mark was trying to play the guilt card. He thought I'd soften, that I'd back down, that I'd forgive him and let him off the hook. But I wasn't that man anymore. "No," I said, my voice firm, unyielding. "You don't suit it to play the victim here. Yusef lied, stolen, manipulated your way through my life. This isn't Sept about us anymore, Mark. This is about you facing the consequences of what Yusef done." Mark flinched, but only for a moment. Then his eyes narrowed, and the shift was instantaneous. The pleading tone melted away, replaced by something colder, sharper. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "You think you can just throw me under the bus and everything will be fine? I worked my ass off for everything I have. I'm entitled to that house. You don't get to take that from me." I stood my ground, my gaze unwavering. "You entitled to nothing, Mark. Not that house, not my money, not my trust. You've already taken enough." The tension in the room was thick, the silence unbearable. Mark clenched his fists, but I could see it in his eyes. He was cracking. His usual bravado was starting to break down, and I was getting closer to the truth. The rage inside him was simmering, and I could feel the stakes rise. "I'm not going to let you destroy everything I worked for," he hissed through clenched teeth. "I'll fight back. You won, win." I wasn't intimidated. "Yusef already lost, Mark. The evidence is all there. It's only a matter of time before Yusef's exposed for the fraud you are." Mark's face twisted in anger, his eyes flashing with something darker than I'd ever seen. But he didn't say anything else. He turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I stood there for a long moment, the silence echoing in my ears. It was clear now Mark was cornered, and when a man like that is cornered, he becomes dangerous. I knew this wasn't over. If anything, it was just the beginning. He was going to try to fight back, to manipulate the situation in his favor, but I had no intention of letting that happen. Later that evening, as I sat in my study, I could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. Mark was on the verge of making his next move, and I needed to be ready. I couldn't afford to be caught off guard. This was a war, and every move counted. Samantha called me that night, her voice tight with urgency. "Kane, there's something you need to know. I've uncovered more about Mark's operations. He's trying to get ahead of you. I found traces of a new bank account, some new transactions. It's like he's trying to cover his tracks before you can expose him. I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't enough for him to try to manipulate me. Now he was trying to cover up his crimes. Sepsa, not surprised. I said, my voice steady despite the rising tension. But it won't set matter. We have enough evidence. He Sep's already crossed the line, and there's Sep's no way out for him. Samantha Sip's voice softened. Just be careful, Kane. He Sip's desperate, and desperate people make dangerous moves. I hung up the phone, the weight of her words lingering in the air. Mark was desperate. That much was clear, but he didn't know what he was up against. I was prepared, and he was about to face the consequences of his actions. The final confrontation was drawing near, and the pieces were all in place. The truth was out there, and Mark would have no choice but to face it. It was only a matter of time. The air felt thicker tonight, heavier than usual. It wasn't the cold that made it unbearable. No, it was the tension that hung like a thick fog in the room. I had waited for this moment for so long, had planned for it meticulously. Every piece of evidence, every strategy had been building toward this. The time had come. Mark's world was about to come crashing down, and I was going to be the one to show him just how far he had fallen. The holiday dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Family gathered around, exchanging pleasantries, laughing about old memories, and toasting to the future. But for me, it had become something far darker. The house, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like a stage for the final act of a drama that had been years in the making. I had invited Mark, of course. The invitation had been simple, casual, but underneath it all there was a deeper message. He needed to show up. He needed to face what he had done. And when he did, I would lay it all out. The truth, the lies, the manipulation, all of it. This dinner wasn't about family. It was about justice. I watched as Mark entered the dining room, his eyes scanning the room, his face frozen in that same smug, self-assured expression I'd seen so many times before. He thought he was in control. He thought this was just another dinner, but he had no idea that tonight everything would change. "Hey, Dad," Mark said, his voice too casual, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't been stealing from me for years. He hugged me, but it felt like a performance, a mask. There was no warmth in it, no real connection. "Mark," I replied, my voice steady, but my heart pounded in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Dinner started, and for a while we fell into the usual small talk. Mark chatted with the rest of the family, his wife and kids sitting around the table. His demeanor was almost convincing. If you didn't know any better, you might think everything was fine. But I knew the truth. I knew the man sitting across from me was a fraud, a thief, and a liar. He had taken everything I'd worked for, everything I loved, and now he was going to pay for it. As the meal went on, I could feel the weight of my decision. Mark was still oblivious to what was coming. He was playing the part of the doting son, laughing at jokes, offering compliments, pretending like he hadn't betrayed everyone in the room. I could feel the rage building inside me, but I had to keep my cool. I couldn't let emotion drive me. This wasn't about getting revenge for revenge's sake. This was about exposing him for what he truly was. I had to wait for the right moment, the perfect time when all eyes were on him. Then, as if on cue, the dinner reached its peak. The conversations had lulled, and the table was filled with empty glasses and half-eaten plates. I stood up, my movements deliberate, and I felt every pair of eyes on me. The room went silent. Mark looked up at me, his brow furrowing. He didn't know what was about to happen. He thought this was still just a family gathering, a chance to smooth things over, but I was done with that. I was done pretending. "It's since time, Mark," I said, my voice cold but steady. "It's since time you faced what you said done." Mark Sepp's face flushed, his expression shifting in a flash from confusion to anger. "What the hell are you talking about, Dad?" he demanded, his voice rising. "What's Sepp's this all about?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out the folder from under the table and laid it on the surface for everyone to see. There were gasps from the family. His wife looked at him, and I saw the first hint of doubt in her eyes. "This," I said, pointing to the folder, "is the truth. This is the proof of everything You've done to me. All the lies. All the manipulation. I opened the folder slowly, taking my time. I knew Mark was trying to gather his thoughts, trying to control the situation, but it was too late. I pulled out the first document, the bank statements showing the transfers he'd made, the withdrawals from my accounts that I hadn't authorized, the email threads, the records of his secret investments, and then the Peace Day resistance, the forged will. I held up the document for everyone to see, the light from the chandelier catching the paper just right. This is your last move, Mark. This is where you thought you could get everything. A fake will, signed by me. It's all a lie. Everything you've done to get what you thought was yours. It's all right here. Mark went pale. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He was speechless, stunned. This wasn't the conversation he had imagined. This wasn't the power play he had planned. His entire world was unraveling in front of him, and he had no way to stop it. You stir a thief, Mark, I continued, my voice unwavering. You stir have stolen from me, from this family, and you thought you could get away with it, but you stir not going to. Not anymore. The room was silent now, all eyes on Mark. His wife was shaking her head, her face a mixture of disbelief and shame. The kids were too young to understand, but they could feel the tension in the air. The truth had been laid bare, and Mark's empire of lies had crumbled. Mark finally found his voice, but it was shaky, desperate. This isn't sep fair. You don't sep know what you stepped you're doing. You stepped you're making a huge mistake. But I wasn't listening. I had nothing left to say to him. The truth had been exposed, and no amount of yelling or pleading would change that. I watched as he crumbled in front of everyone. The man who thought he could take everything from me now reduced to nothing more than a scared, broken shell. As Mark's world collapsed around him, I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The fight was over. The truth had been revealed, and Mark would have to face the consequences of his actions. He wouldn't get away with it, not anymore. The family remained silent for what felt like an eternity. No one knew what to say, and in that silence, I knew one thing for sure: Mark had lost. The house, the money, everything he had tried to steal from me, it was all gone. And in its place, justice had been served. The days after the dinner were like a whirlwind, and yet everything seemed to slow down at the same time. I had done what I set out to do. Mark's life, his lies, and his manipulation were all exposed for everyone to see. But as satisfying as that was, the aftermath was far more complicated. The fallout wasn't just about Mark's disgrace. It was about the deep, irreparable cracks it had created in the family. The first thing that happened was that Mark's wife Linda left him. She hadn't spoken much at the dinner, but her shock and confusion were evident in her eyes as the truth came out. I could tell she hadn't known the full extent of Mark's actions. She was betrayed, too, and now she couldn't live with the man he had become. When I got the call from her the next day, it was the last thing I expected. "Kane," she said, her voice trembling, "I can sit do this anymore. I don't sit know who he is. I thought he was someone else. I thought we had a family. But I can sit live with the lies anymore. I sit leaving him." I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relieved that Linda was finally seeing the truth for herself, but guilty that it had to happen this way. Mark's actions had destroyed everything, not just my trust, but his own family. I'd known for a long time that Mark was capable of cruelty, but seeing the way his wife had been shaken to her core was a reminder of how deep the damage went. Sorry, Linda," I said softly. "I never wanted it to come to this, but you said you're doing the right thing." The next few days were a blur of phone calls and legal consultations. Mark didn't even try to reach out to me anymore. He knew there was no fixing this, no way to talk his way out of the mess he'd made, but he wasn't the only one suffering the consequences. I received a call from my lawyer, Ava, on a Thursday afternoon. "Kane, I have some news," she said, her voice sounding urgent. "We've secured a court date for the fraud case. It's official now. Mark's financial dealings are going to be scrutinized, and there's no way he's getting out of this. His reputation is shot." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the news sinking in. This was it. The moment Mark had been dreading had arrived, and there was no running from the truth anymore. "I never wanted it to get this far," I said, my voice heavy with resignation. but he left me no choice. Exactly, Ava responded. The evidence is solid. Yusef done everything by the book, Cain. He's going to have to answer for all of this. The next few weeks were filled with more legal battles, more paperwork, and the steady march toward Mark's inevitable fall. But the emotional toll was something I wasn't prepared for. Every time I saw my grandchildren, every time I thought about the future that was now out of my reach, I felt a pang of loss. This battle had cost me more than I expected. Mark's disgrace made headlines in the local news. Articles started popping up about the fraud case, about the stolen money, the forged documents, and the unraveling of his life. His business ventures collapsed almost overnight. His colleagues and clients began to distance themselves from him, and even his friends turned their backs. The Mark everyone thought they knew was gone, replaced by a man who could no longer hide behind his charm or lies. But for all the satisfaction of seeing him exposed, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the cost. I had won the battle, but I had lost so much more than I had gained. My son, who I had hoped would one day take over the legacy I had built, was gone. There was no fixing that. The family I had once known was broken beyond repair, and no amount of money or legal victories could change that. One afternoon, as I sat in my living room, watching the news coverage of Mark's downfall, I received a message from my daughter-in-law. She had decided to meet with me, to talk about what had happened. I wasn't sure if I was ready for that conversation, but I agreed. It felt like the right thing to do. We met at a cafe a few days later. I could see the sadness in her eyes, the sorrow that came with the realization that her husband had betrayed not only me, but her as well. The weight of it all was too much to carry alone. Cain, she said, her voice soft. I never thought Mark was capable of this. You warned me. I didn't listen. I am so sorry for what he set's done. I didn't want to believe it. You couldn't just have known, Linda, I said quietly. None of us did, but now we know the truth. The conversation was difficult, filled with pauses and quiet reflections, but it was also necessary. In a strange way, I felt some sense of healing, if not for me, then for her. Mark had taken so much from both of us, but at least we could both begin to move forward. When I returned home that night, I sat down in front of the fireplace, staring at the flames. The house was quieter now. The weight of Mark's absence in our lives was palpable. But as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized something. This wasn't just about the money or the house or the revenge. This was about reclaiming my sense of self. I had been manipulated, betrayed, and used for far too long. But in the end, I had found my strength. Justice had been served, but at a cost. Mark was no longer part of my life, and there was no going back from that. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: my legacy, my integrity, and my honor were intact. Mark had lost everything, and it was his own doing. As the days went by, I found peace in that. I had fought for what was right, and now I was free. The weeks following Mark's exposure were a blur of legal battles, media coverage, and constant reminders that I had fought a war, not just for my home and my money, but for my dignity. The court proceedings had begun, and Mark's fraudulent actions were now under a microscope. His every move was being scrutinized, and for once it wasn't me who was the target. The day of the trial arrived with a tension I couldn't shake. I had been prepared for this moment for months, but now that it was here, the weight of everything, every document, every email, every lie Mark had told, felt heavier than ever. I sat in the courtroom, the buzz of conversation around me almost deafening. Ava sat beside me, her focus unwavering as we waited for the trial to begin. She had been my ally throughout this entire process, helping me navigate the legal maze, ensuring that every piece of evidence was in place. The doors to the courtroom opened, and Mark walked in, his shoulders slumped, his once confident stride now reduced to a slow shuffle. I couldn't help but notice how different he looked. The man who had stood so arrogantly at that dinner, the man who had spent years manipulating me, now seemed small, broken. It was almost hard to recognize him as the same person, but I knew who he was. I knew what he had done, and I wasn't going to let him escape the consequences. Mark took a seat on the other side of the courtroom, avoiding eye contact with me. I could feel the coldness between us, the distance that had grown wider and wider since that night when everything had been revealed. But today, it wasn't about emotions. It wasn't about me and him. It was about justice. The judge called the court to order, and the trial began. Ava stood up, her voice steady and calm as she presented our case. Every accusation, every shred of evidence was laid bare for the court to see: the forged will, the bank statements, the hidden accounts, the emails between Mark and his wife detailing their plans to steal my money and my home. It was all there, all of it. And with every word Ava spoke, I could feel Mark's world slipping further away. Mark's attorney tried to fight back, of course. They attempted to discredit the evidence, to paint me as the one who was mistaken or confused. But every argument they presented was weak, crumbling under the weight of the truth. The fraud was undeniable, and as the hours wore on, I could see Mark's face growing more and more pale, his eyes darting nervously between his lawyer and the evidence that was slowly burying him. The moment I had been waiting for finally came. Ava called me to the stand, and I took a deep breath as I stood up. I had never been one for public speaking, never enjoyed being the center of attention, but today I wasn't there for myself. I was there for my family, for the justice I had fought for. As I sat down in the witness chair, I glanced at Mark, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected: fear. Not the cocky confidence he had once shown, but true, raw fear. He knew he was losing. He knew the end was near. "Mr. Kane," the prosecutor said, his voice firm, "can you describe what you discovered regarding your son Senna's financial activities?" I cleared my throat, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. I found a trail of lies, manipulation, and theft. I found evidence that my son Mark had been siphoning money from my accounts for years. He had set up hidden bank accounts and forged legal documents to steal my property, everything I had worked for. There was a pause in the room, and I could feel the weight of my words settle over the courtroom. Mark's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced them with a wave of his hand. "Were you aware of these actions before they were revealed to you?" the prosecutor continued. "No," I replied. "I had no idea. I trusted my son. I believed he was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. I didn't know the extent of his deception until it was too late." I felt the eyes of the room on me, the weight of the truth bearing down on Mark. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but I didn't look away. This was the moment. This was the reckoning. I had been betrayed by my own blood, and now he would pay for it. As I gave my testimony, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The fear, the anger, the frustration that had built up inside me over the months, it was all being released. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was someone who had fought back, who had taken control of his life, and I was going to see this through to the end. When I finished, I sat back down, and the prosecutor continued with the case. Mark's attorney presented their defense, but it was a futile attempt. Mark had already been exposed. There was no denying the evidence. The case was airtight. As the trial came to a close, the judge called for a recess, and the jury left to deliberate. It felt like an eternity as we waited. But I knew what the verdict would be. The evidence was clear. Mark had betrayed me, and now he would face the consequences. When the jury returned, the tension in the room was palpable. The foreman stood up, and the room fell silent. "We, the jury, find the defendant Mark Kane guilty of financial fraud, theft, and forgery," he said, his voice ringing out. The words hit me like a wave, and for a moment I felt a rush of emotions. Relief, anger, but mostly I felt vindication. I had fought for justice, and now it had been served. Mark's face went white. His entire body sagged as if the weight of the world had just collapsed on him. He didn't say a word as the judge called for sentencing. He didn't have to. The verdict was enough. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of finality. The fight was over. Mark had lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, and the trust of everyone who had once believed in him. And as I walked out, I knew one thing for sure: I had regained what was mine. The days after the trial were a blur of mixed emotions. It was hard to believe that it was finally over. Mark's guilty verdict had brought the justice I'd fought for, but the relief felt almost hollow, like a weight lifting from my chest. only to leave a lingering emptiness. I'd exposed Mark for the fraud he was, and he would never be able to walk away from the consequences of his actions. The satisfaction of victory, though, didn't quite erase the cost of what had been lost. I stood at the window of my study, looking out at the same yard where I'd spent countless afternoons with Mark when he was a child, playing catch, watching him grow into the man who would one day betray me. The irony stung. I had always believed that family was everything, that it was the foundation upon which everything else was built. But Mark had shown me otherwise. Family for him had been a tool to manipulate, a means to an end. I thought about the future, about what it would be like now. The house, once so full of life, now felt too quiet. It was as though the silence had seeped into every corner, and with it a strange sense of loss. Not just for the money or the house, but for the relationship that had been shattered beyond repair. I had thought about calling my grandchildren, trying to explain things to them, trying to find a way to rebuild some semblance of a connection. But the truth was, I didn't know where to start. Mark had been their father, their hero, and now I was the one left to pick up the pieces. But then again, I'd always known this might happen. I had spent so many years protecting Mark, trying to give him everything I could, and in return he had stolen my future. He had stolen our family. But what did that say about me? I couldn't help but wonder if I had seen the signs and ignored them, if I had been so blinded by my love for my son that I couldn't see the man he was becoming. He had been manipulative from the start, but it had taken years for me to recognize it. I had been so willing to believe in him, to trust him, and now I had nothing but empty rooms and broken promises. Before the trial, I had never truly understood how far Mark's betrayal went. I had believed in the best in people, in the bond we shared. I had thought, despite all his flaws, that Mark would come around, that he would realize the value of what we had, what I had worked so hard to build. But in the end, it wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, the need to take from others to feel whole. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Ava standing there, her face calm but her eyes betraying the weariness of the past few weeks. The trial had taken its toll on everyone, and I knew she had been just as invested in this as I had. But even with all the legal victories, she seemed different now, more distant, more reserved. "Kane," she said softly, walking into the room. "I know it's been a lot, but I wanted to check in on you. How are you doing?" I shrugged, unsure of how to answer. "It's over, Ava. I should feel relief, but it just feels empty. The victory feels hollow." She nodded, taking a seat across from me. "It's as natural. You've been through so much. It's not just about the money or the house. It's about the betrayal, the loss of everything you thought you had. But that's the thing, Kane. You've done the right thing. Justice was served." I let out a long breath, running my hand through my hair. "I know, but it sits harder than I expected. I thought maybe I could move on after this, but there sits no going back. The family I once knew is gone. Mark is gone." Ava leaned forward, her expression soft but resolute. "You did everything you could for him. You gave him everything you had, but Mark chose his path. That steps on him, not you." I thought about what she said for a moment, and a small part of me began to understand. Ava was right. There was no point in blaming myself for Mark's choices. I had done everything I could to give him the best life possible. It wasn't my fault that he had chosen to betray me. It wasn't my fault that he had let greed and entitlement consume him. I just wish things had been different. I said quietly, looking down at my hands. I wish I could have seen it sooner. Maybe I could have saved him, saved us. Ava gave me a sympathetic look. "You can set it change the past, but you can control the future. You can start fresh, Kane, and this time you said her doing it for you. Not for Mark, not for anyone else." I felt a flicker of hope at her words. There was truth in what she said. The past couldn't be rewritten, but the future, my future, was mine to shape. It wasn't too late to rebuild, to find new meaning in life, even if it was without Mark. I had spent so many years being defined by my role as a father, a provider, a protector. But now I could be defined by something else. I could be defined by my strength, my resolve. I could choose to move forward to find peace, and to let go of the resentment that had weighed me down for so long. I looked out the window again, this time with a sense of clarity. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine. And as I stood there, I realized something else. Sometimes the hardest thing to do isn't fighting for what you've lost. Sometimes it's letting go. The days following the trial felt surreal. Life seemed to move in slow motion, as if I were watching everything unfold from a distance, unable to fully grasp that the war was over. Mark was gone from my life, his world shattered, his reputation in ruins. But the victory didn't feel like a triumph. It felt more like an echo, a distant reminder of the years lost, the family broken, the trust betrayed. Mark's life had fallen apart in ways I hadn't expected. His business was dissolved. The properties he had acquired with my money were seized. The media latched onto the story like vultures, turning his every move into a scandal. The articles that followed painted him as a manipulative, cold-hearted man, a criminal who had spent years deceiving those closest to him. The court hearings were only the beginning of his downfall. Mark's financial assets were frozen, and his debts began to pile up. He tried to fight back, of course. Lawyers, appeals, and denials. But the evidence was undeniable. It wasn't just me who had suffered because of him. It was everyone he had come into contact with, the people who had trusted him, who had invested in his lies, now found themselves with nothing but empty promises. But as satisfying as it was to see him pay for his crimes, the truth was hard to swallow. This wasn't just about Mark's downfall. It was about what I had lost, the trust I had placed in him, the hope I had once held for our future together. I had been a father who wanted nothing more than to pass on something meaningful to his son, to give him the opportunities I had never had. But Mark had thrown it all away, and in doing so he had destroyed everything I had worked for, everything I had built. I sat in the quiet of my study, staring out the window. The autumn leaves had begun to fall, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the heaviness I felt inside. The house, the place that had once been filled with laughter and love, now felt too empty. It was just me now, and it had been a long time since I had been alone with myself. I thought about Mark, about what had driven him to do what he did, what had made him think he could take everything from me, from us. Was it greed? Was it entitlement? Or was it something deeper? A fear of being inadequate, of not living up to the expectations I had set for him. I would never know, and maybe it didn't matter. But the hardest part, the part that lingered, was the question of what came next. What now? After all the betrayal, all the hurt, was there any way to rebuild the pieces of my life that Mark had destroyed? Could I move forward, knowing that my own son had tried to take everything from me? The answer didn't come immediately. For weeks I felt adrift, like a ship without a rudder, drifting on an endless sea. I wasn't angry anymore, not like I had been. The rage had given way to exhaustion, but there was still a part of me that wondered if things could ever be the same. I tried to move forward. I started seeing old friends again, those who had stuck by me through thick and thin. They had been there when Mark had betrayed me, offering support. But the truth was, no one could truly understand what I had been through. No one knew what it was like to be betrayed by your own flesh and blood. There were moments when I'd go to pick up the phone to call Mark. A small part of me hoped he would come to his senses, that he would reach out, apologize, and admit the depth of his wrongs. But that hope faded with every passing day. Mark wasn't going to change. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. And yet, there was a part of me that missed him. Not the man he had become, but the boy he used to be. The boy who used to sit on the porch with me, asking questions about life, about the world. The boy I had taught to read, to think critically, to believe in the value of hard work and honesty. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who had lost his way. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Mark. At first, I thought about tossing it aside, ignoring it, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the faintest hope that he had changed, that he had realized the error of his ways. I opened the letter slowly, my hands trembling just a bit as I read his words. I know I svert you. I know I svert taken everything from you, and I can never make it right. I don't sit expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that I said I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I said I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. It was brief. It was simple, and it was the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the letter. A part of me wanted to feel relief, but another part of me felt nothing. The damage had been done. The relationship between father and son had been irreparably fractured. Mark's apology didn't erase the years of lies, the manipulation, the stolen trust. But as I sat there, something shifted inside me. I didn't need Mark's apology to move on. I had already taken back what was mine. My dignity, my legacy, my peace of mind. I had fought for justice, and I had won. I had been through the storm, and now I was ready to rebuild. The letter, while it didn't provide closure, gave me something else, something I didn't expect, a sense of peace. Mark had apologized. He had acknowledged his wrongs, and that was enough. It was time to let go. I placed the letter on the desk, folded my hands in my lap, and let out a long breath. The battle was over. The aftermath had been brutal, but I had survived. I had reclaimed my life, and now I was ready to move forward, no longer defined by what Mark had taken from me, but by what I had gained, my strength, my sense of self, and my future. It had been months since the trial, and I had begun to settle into the new rhythm of life. The echoes of Mark's betrayal still lingered, but they were quieter now. Time had done its work, and I had learned to move forward without looking back, to rebuild what had been lost. But even now there were moments when the weight of what had happened would hit me. Small reminders that no matter how much time passed, some things could never be fully erased. It was late one evening when I got the call. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it felt important, so I answered. Kane, a familiar voice said on the other end. It was Mark. His voice was different. Tired, weary, and tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Mark, I said, my tone neutral. I wasn't angry anymore. There was nothing left to be angry about. His betrayal had already been paid for, and I had already moved on. Still, hearing his voice again stirred something inside me. I know it's been a while, he continued, but I need to talk to you. I've been trying to reach you for months, and You sent not going to get away with this, Mark. I interrupted, my voice steady. There seemed nothing left to say. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, as if Mark were choosing his words carefully. Finally he spoke again, his voice softer, almost as if he were pleading. I don't want anything from you, Dad. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I've been trying to make things right. I've not the person I was. I've lost everything, and now I have nothing left but the truth. I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. After everything, after all the lies, the manipulation, the destruction he had caused, Mark was calling me to apologize. It seemed almost impossible, like some cruel twist of fate. You want forgiveness, Mark? I asked, my voice low. Do you even understand what you've done? You took everything, not just from me, but from the whole family. You've destroyed lives, and now you want me to give you my forgiveness? I could hear Mark's breath on the other end of the line, ragged and uncertain. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I've been through hell, Kane. I've lost everything I thought I had, and I've realized it was never worth it. All of it, the lies, the manipulation, it was never worth it. I destroyed everything that mattered. I felt a strange sense of detachment as I listened to his words. Part of me wanted to feel some sort of satisfaction, to hear him suffer for what he had done. But as I listened to his voice crack, the truth of his apology, however late, seemed genuine. And for the first time in a long time I realized that, perhaps, that was enough. Mark, I said, my voice softer than I had expected. I said fought for justice, for myself and for this family. But Yusep's right about one thing. Yusep lost everything. And there's nothing I can do to change that. Another pause. And then his voice quiet, almost broken. I understand. I've lost you. I've lost everything. But at least now, I can admit it. That's all I can do. I sat back in my chair looking out the window as the silence stretched between us. There was a strange kind of closure in his words. Mark was a broken man, and I had no desire to try to fix him. He had made his choices, and he had to live with them. But I couldn't help but feel a twinge of something else, a quiet sorrow for the son I once knew, for the boy who had once looked up to me. I can change the past, Mark, I said finally, my voice steady but tired. And neither can you. But you set her right about one thing we set her both lost. Mark Sip's voice cracked again, and I knew he was struggling with the weight of his words. I don't expect you to forgive me, Dad. I just wanted you to know I is dumb sorry. I let out a deep breath, rubbing my forehead as I sat in the stillness. The truth, the final irony, was that Mark's apology, while long overdue, didn't change anything. It didn't undo the pain, the loss, or the years wasted. But in that moment, I realized something important. He had given me something I hadn't expected. Closure. I hear you, Mark, I said, my voice steady now. And that seems all I can ask for. But don't expect me to forget. I once said. I paused for a moment, as if weighing something in my mind. Then I added, you didn't lose me, Mark. You gave me away. The line went silent for a moment, and I could feel the weight of those words hang in the air. Mark didn't respond. He didn't need to. We both knew it was over. The son I had once known was gone, and no apology, no matter how sincere, could ever bring him back. I guess this is goodbye, he said quietly. Goodbye, Mark, I replied, and I hung up the phone. I sat there for a while, letting the finality of it all settle in. Mark was gone. The father-son bond we once shared had been irreparably shattered. There was no going back, and maybe that was the only truth that mattered now. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my future, but I would never forget the lessons I had learned along the way. As I stood up from the desk and walked toward the window, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The past was behind me now. Mark had given me away, but I had found something far more valuable in the process myself.